The blue light hits your eyes before you even register the time. You reach for the phone. 1 notification, then 10. By the time you sit up, 47 alerts demand your attention. You scroll through emails while the coffee burns, trying to process the digital noise before the real day even starts. You step out the door and into the crawl of heavy traffic. Engines hum, horns blare, and the clock on the dashboard counts down the minutes until you are late. You walk into the office, grab a chair, and find yourself trapped in a meeting. It is labeled as a 5-minute check-in, but the clock on the wall ticks forward for a full hour. You nod, you type, you pretend to listen to the drone of voices. This is the cycle. You repeat it today, and you will repeat it tomorrow. You are a cog in a machine that never stops turning, and the silence you crave is nowhere to be found. You bury your head in the task, waiting for the sun to go down so you can do it all over again. But pull back from the cubicle wall, and the perspective shifts entirely. For the vast majority of our existence, this cycle did not exist. There were no resumes. There were no performance reviews to dread. No manager named Steve sent you a message on Slack to ask for a status update. There were no passwords to reset, no symbols to memorize, and no digital gates keeping you from your own life. For roughly 300,000 years, humans lived without any of it. We did not work for a corporation. We did not pay taxes. We did not commute. We lived as hunter-gatherers, moving across the earth as our needs dictated. Life was not measured in hourly blocks or quarterly goals. The heavy, suffocating weight of modern employment was a blip in the timeline, a recent invention that would have been entirely unrecognizable to our ancestors. They did not wake up to a screen. They did not live for the weekend. Their existence was defined by entirely different rules, and their survival was not tied to a digital profile or an inbox. They were not cogs. They were simply people, existing in a world where these modern pressures had not yet been dreamed into reality. Ancient humans began their days not with an alarm clock, but with the first golden light hitting the horizon. There were no snooze buttons. There was no groggy scroll through news feeds. The moment the sun broke the skyline, the workday began with a singular, immediate priority: environmental awareness. They did not check an inbox, they scanned the brush. They did not look at a calendar, they read the wind. Every morning was a calculated assessment of the territory. They looked for the telltale shift of tall grass or the faint, musky scent of a predator lingering on the breeze. This was a world without safety nets. If you zoned out for a second, the consequences were not a missed meeting or a reprimand from a supervisor. The consequences were terminal. You cannot afford to be distracted, not even for a heartbeat. While the modern worker drifts through the morning in a haze, your ancestors were locked into a state of total, lethal focus. They moved through the world with their senses stretched to the limit, knowing that the difference between life and death was often just a single, overlooked shadow or an ignored sound in the distance. The environment was the ultimate manager, and it demanded your absolute attention. Survival demanded a level of physical output that would leave a modern athlete gasping for air. There were no designated gyms. There were no treadmills. There were no pre-workout supplements to mask the fatigue. Your ancestors moved because the earth required it, and they did so for miles on end, every single day. They traversed rugged terrain, climbing steep inclines and navigating dense vegetation with heavy gear strapped to their backs. It was a relentless, involuntary marathon that lasted a lifetime. They walked across continents, crossed shifting riverbeds, and climbed rock faces simply to reach the next source of water or shelter. This was not exercise. It was the baseline condition of being alive. Today, we pay monthly fees to run on a machine that goes nowhere, meticulously tracking our heart rates on a screen. We treat cardio as a chore to be squeezed into a lunch break. For them, it was the only way to reach the next sunrise. They accidentally completed more physical work before noon than most humans today achieve in an entire week. They were built for the climb, fueled by the necessity of the hunt, and conditioned by the unforgiving geography of a world that never offered a resting point. Their bodies were the ultimate tools, honed by the constant, grinding pressure of a life that never sat still. Movement was only the beginning. Finding fuel was the true test. In the absence of grocery stores, the forest floor became a sprawling, silent market where the inventory was rarely benign. Hunger was a constant, gnawing weight, but it could not dictate impulse. They moved slowly through the undergrowth, eyes scanning the moss and the decaying logs. A vibrant cluster of mushrooms caught the light. To a modern eye, it looked like a meal. To them, it looked like a potential casket. There were no warning labels in nature, no FDA, no ingredient lists, no expiration dates. Every berry, root, or fungal growth was a high-stakes gamble. They knelt, studying the underside of a cap, checking for the specific color of the gills or the texture of the stem. One mistake meant a slow, agonizing end. They picked up a handful of berries, turning them over, crushing one slightly to catch the scent. If the smell was wrong or the color too bright, they left it behind. It was a game of probabilities played with the stomach. They did not just eat to survive. They ate to avoid being poisoned by the very earth that sustained them. They learned the hard way through the collective memory of the group, which plants offered life and which offered a quick, quiet death. It was a brutal, intimate relationship with the land, where the simplest act of sustenance required a masterclass in botanical caution. The focus shifted from gathering to the deliberate, cold calculation of the hunt. This was no longer about scanning the ground for stationary plants. It was about anticipating the intent of a living target. They stopped, holding their breath to listen to the shifting patterns of the wind. They needed to remain downwind, a task that required constant adjustment as the air currents swirled through the valley. A single scent carried on the breeze could give them away, ending the chase before it began. They moved with a predatory stillness, placing their feet on solid rock to leave no impression. They scanned the dust for the slightest disturbance, a crushed blade of grass, a pebble turned over, a faint smudge in the dry earth. The ground spoke a language of movement. When they found a print, they did not rush. They studied the depth, the angle of the stride, and the spacing between the marks to gauge the animal's speed and fatigue. Every detail was a piece of a larger puzzle. The air grew thick with the weight of the coming pursuit. They were not merely following. They were closing a gap that had been widening for hours. The pressure mounted with every step, a silent, singular focus that locked out the rest of the world. They checked the horizon one last time, adjusted their grip on their gear, and committed to the trail. The stalk had begun. The chase moved from a walk to a rhythmic, ground-eating jog. It was not a sprint. It was a slow, crushing inevitability. Hours melted into the landscape. The hunters did not need to be faster than their target. They only needed to be more persistent. When the animal bounded ahead, clearing thickets and crossing rocky slopes, the hunters simply adjusted their pace, never breaking the steady, lung-burning rhythm. They watched the prey's flanks heave. They saw the gait falter, the initial explosive power giving way to a ragged, uneven stride. The animal tried to turn, to weave through the dense brush, but every move was met with the same unrelenting shadow behind it. There was no escape from the lack of rest. The sun climbed, baked the earth, and beat down on the backs of both the pursuer and the pursued. The animal's tongue lolled, coated in dust. It stumbled once, regained its footing, and then, with a final, desperate heave, its legs gave out. It crashed into the tall grass, limbs trembling, unable to rise again. The hunters stopped. The air hung heavy with the sound of their own ragged breathing. The long, exhausting game of endurance had reached its absolute end. The final act was swift and silent. The hunters stood over the fallen prey, their own heart rate slowing in the cooling air. Adrenaline, which had fueled their muscles for miles, drained away, leaving behind a profound, heavy physical ease. They did not cheer. They acknowledged the success with a sharp nod, a shared glance of recognition that the tribe would eat for days. They knelt in the dirt, hands moving with practiced efficiency to secure the prize. The forest, which had been a theater of tension, now felt vast and empty again. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry earth and pine. They worked together, dividing the weight, every motion deliberate and necessary. There was no waste, no hesitation, only the steady, rhythmic labor of survival. As they stood, the burden of the hunt was replaced by the weight of the harvest. They looked back at the trail they had carved through the landscape, a path of endurance that had now reached its goal. The survival mission was complete. They turned toward the horizon, moving with a slower, heavier gait, their heads held high. The tension of the pursuit had evaporated, leaving behind the quiet, grounded triumph of a successful provider. They began the long trek back to the fire. The firelight danced against the faces of those waiting. As the hunters entered the circle, the heavy packs hit the ground with a dull thud. The labor of the day ended, but the work of the tribe began. They sat close, knees touching, sharing the warmth. One hand picked up a piece of bone, using a sharp stone to carve intricate patterns into the surface. Another person demonstrated the movement of the day, acting out the path of the chase, arms sweeping through the air to mimic the flight of a bird or the sprint of a deer. Children watched, their eyes locked on the gestures, learning the history of the land through the rhythm of the story. They played games with smooth river stones, stacking them until they tumbled, then laughing and starting over. There were no demands, no ticking clocks, and no messages to answer. They traded stories, their voices rising and falling with the crackle of the flames. When someone struggled to reach a heavy branch for the fire, another reached out to help before the request was even spoken. They were a single, functioning unit, bound by the shared language of the campfire. This was the heartbeat of their existence, a constant, living connection that left no room for isolation. Contrast that rhythm with your morning. The fluorescent lights hum above your desk, flickering in a way your brain was never designed to process. You sit, trapped by a spreadsheet, while a printer jams for the third time today. This is the mismatch. Your ancestors evolved for sunlight, for the variable terrain of the earth, and for the constant, reassuring presence of others. You, instead, navigate a digital landscape of endless notifications and online arguments about trivialities. We have gained antibiotics and indoor plumbing, luxuries that secure our survival in ways they could never imagine. Yet, we pay a price in silence. We trade the campfire for the screen and wonder why the exhaustion never lifts. The burnout is not a personal failure. It is a biological protest. Your body remembers the tribe, the shared labor, and the simple, unmediated reality of a face-to-face conversation. The next time you feel that familiar weight of modern isolation, look away from the monitor. Remember that for thousands of generations, entertainment was not a stream of data or a glowing pixel. It was simply each other. The solution is not a better app or a faster connection. It is the return to the core of what we are, people sitting together, breathing the same air, and sharing the weight of the day.